it's been amazing to be able to concentrate on money, sound versus unsound money, and to have you, Professor, and Sandy, and Rudy.
Thank you for bringing me to that. Without you, wouldn't have been able to.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm not sure what the professor has in mind this afternoon with the title, The Gold Standard Manifesto. Maybe he has a new political party he wants to set up. We will find out. I don't think so, but we will take a photo at the during the breaks. Probably not here because we can't take a photo from here and get everybody in. Probably near where we have the afternoon tea, coffee.
Or on the steps out front, because you hear people one row behind the other.
Well, if we can't do it there, then we do it after the Q&A outside of the steps. Or the steps up front, you mean inside or outside?
Well, steps indoor, just they help it.
Yeah, outside there's quite a lot of options. Yeah, that's true. We'll do it anyway, you're on call. Thank you. Well, without further ado, please welcome Professor Fekete.
Now we have come to the last lecture, but we will have a question answer after the tea. So I anticipate your question. The Gold Standard Manifesto, it has been written, and it has been around for some time. It's on my website. So I refer you to my website. I certainly would like you to download it and keep it. I'm not going to repeat it. I just give you a little bit of background and elaborate on some of the points, the highlights of this Gold Standard Manifesto. Well, it's tongue-in-cheek, you might have noticed, because there was such a thing as the Communist Manifesto written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, and it was published in 1848. And it started, I just borrowed the introduction, the first sentence, the scepter of I haven't got it. I don't guess. Let's see if anybody has it here. But anyhow, it doesn't matter. The point is this. The Communist Manifesto has in many ways changed the world. And changed the world for the worse. And it's high time that we should have a manifesto which would change the world for the better. So that was the intention, and I'm going to put two documents side by side. And in fact, I talk about the tale of two documents. One, chronologically, the first one was the U.S. Constitution. The second is the Communist Manifesto. And you can think of the past century and a half as a struggle between these two great documents. I would call the Communist Manifesto a great document for the evil it has done and the evil it was conceived in. But it was still a great document, and that's the view I am offering to you, that these two very powerful, very great documents have been in combat with one another. And we still don't know what the outcome most memorable phrase which the Communist Manifesto used was, "Proletarians of the world, unite. Proletarians of the world, rise. All you can lose is your chains." Now, as a matter of fact, the Communist Manifesto talked about modern slavery. The proletarians were deprived of the fruits of their labor because the tools of production were wrenched out of their hands and expropriated by the capitalists. At any rate, it was slavery, as they said. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I am suggesting to you that slavery hasn't been abolished. It's still very much with us, and we are very much suffering from it. What has changed is that the bonds of slavery become invisible. It's no longer obvious that slavery exists. In fact, the slaves very often think that they have the upper hand. So this is invidious, and more invidious form of slavery than has ever existed, because in the ancient world, slaves are very much aware that they were slaves. And it was openly practiced. And bad as it was, at least the knowledge that you are a slave was helpful in the sense that it gave you a feeling of solidarity. And now, today, we have slavery, but the slaves are not aware of of their status. And this drive for the proletarians to unite, the slaves to unite, has a hollow ring, because these people, most of them, do not realize their status. They are slaves and they would like to be free. So this idea of uniting is very much more difficult to project, because if you have this cry that modern slaves of irredeemable currency, modern slaves of fiat currency unite, will not have the response as the cry of Marx and Engels had in 1848. Nevertheless, it is a slavery. Freedom is lost under the fiat money system. The chains are now invisible, and so are the whips. But be sure there are whips and there are chains. The slaves are bribed with their own produce. They are bribed with welfare state promises which are pretty well meaningless, because what happens is that under the welfare system, all the produce of the slaves is expropriated by the government, and then the government, invisibly and undetectably, and then the government comes around and gives it back piecemeal, subject to recall. So these slaves who do not realize they are slaves are very grateful to the hand that feeds them. it's a most invidious system, as I have said. So a little bit of philosophy is in order. How is it possible that our so-called enlightened age and widespread education, I mean, in many ways, the level of education in the world today is far higher than it was 100 years ago, any time in history. If you think of the widespread nature of education, I mean, the elite always got top education. But now, we must admit that the level has been widened greatly. So we have a better educated society. So the philosophical question I am posing is, how is it possible that this widespread education and we have science, we have arts, we have reached great heights in many walks of life. And it's possible to pull a fast one on society. It's such a welfare state propaganda when it's really the slave is bribed with the produce of his own labor. Very vicious system. So, is there an explanation? I think there is. And we go back to the principle of causality. We know that in the real world, one of the most fundamental laws is the law of causality. Things do not happen at random. They may appear that they do. But in fact, there is cause and effect. And if you do not see that clearly, and if you are confused, that's because in some cases cause and effect are intertwined, and it takes research, very meticulous analysis to separate them. But they are there, cause and effect. And that's actually our only way to understand reality. If we didn't have that law, cause and effect, then we would be completely lost. The world would be just a concatenation of random events, chaos, and there would be no such thing as science or possibility of knowing the world, learning about the truth. So causality is one of the great laws of what science has given us. There's another one, and I'm not going to talk about it in detail today, but I would like to put it side by side, because the second fundamental law of philosophy or knowledge, I would call it epistemology, that branch of philosophy which is concerned with the nature and limits of knowledge. So one is the principle of causality, and the other is the principle of teleology. Not theology, it's teleology, which is it is the principle which reveals the connection between purposeful action. Mises put it beautifully when he picked the title, human action. Human beings act, which means they have a purpose, that they can focus and concentrate their actions in the service of that final goal for purpose. And this has to be recognized as a great force in society, and particularly in economics. But that's not my subject today. I just want to put the two principles side by side, and especially because the second principle is purposefully suppressed. Philosophers are not too anxious to study the principle of teleology, much as they are anxious to study the principle of causality. Teleology gets a short shrift. Now, why that is, again, is not my topic, but it's a great question, interesting question. So, we have this principle of causality, and it always acts without exception, but there is something which could confuse the picture, and this is the fact that sometimes causality doesn't act instantaneously. It acts with a lag. In other words, there is a cause, and the effect will turn up a year later, or 10 years later, or even 100 years later. There are examples of that. And when that happens, people are liable to lose sight. They will not recognize that there is a causality, there is a cause and an effect, simply because of the time lag. There's no reason why causality should act instantaneously. Of course, in physics it usually does, but again, if you think of something like radioactive decay, then you will see that the effect could be delayed. In some cases, hundreds of years. So we just shouldn't take it for granted that cause and effect is an instantaneous action. It's not. In some cases it is, but we should recognize cases when it isn't. So in particular, it also means that there is such a thing as crime and punishment, and it could be that punishment is separated from the crime by a long lag. Causality will bring the punishment about, but it could be delayed, and it could be delayed so long that we lose sight of the causality connection. And this is the danger. Because if you do not see causality, but causality is still there, it means that we will not be able to learn from our mistakes. We all make mistakes, and if the punishment for these mistakes is instantaneous, then we are going to learn probably from our mistakes. But once this lag, this delayed effect appears, then the learning effect will be diluted and in some cases lost. And I think this is what has happened to us, thanks to the destruction of money, which has been a long process. I am sticking to the idea I mentioned to you that we have had this for 100 years. About 100 years ago, in 1909, legislation I consider as a milestone, and we can count the destruction of money from that date. It wasn't instantaneous, it took a long time, and in most of the cases the effect was delayed, and therefore people do not understand that any deterioration in our present situation is the outcome, is the result of this chain of causality. And I like to give another example. This is the supertanker its course going from one point to another, and sometimes it has to change direction. And we all know that there is such a thing as inertia, and because of that inertia, a supertanker will take a long time to change its course because of its sheer bulk and other factors. So that is something one has to take into account. If we want to achieve something, acting to promote an idea or to change its course, we have to take that into account. And it's very much like that in our present situation. If we want change, if we want sound money, if we want to discard unsound money, this is not going to be instantaneous, basically because of the educational problem which is involved in this program. It's just a forbidding process, educating people. Our hope would be the young generation, young people coming down. But unfortunately, the public education system as it exists today is making this very, very difficult. Now I come back to the tale of two documents, the US Constitution on the one hand and the Communist Manifesto on the other. In my previous lectures I did mention, in fact I mentioned it at least twice, the Greek epic Iliad, the Greeks, how the Greeks conquered the city of Troy after 10-year siege. Couldn't get anywhere. There was a lot of bloodshed. Very talented warriors died on both sides, and it was a stalemate. That's a clear-cut stalemate. And then the Greeks had recourse to cunning. And that was due to one man, Odysseus, who is the hero of another epic, the Odyssey. But now we are talking about the Iliad. Odysseus realized that there is only one way to conquer Troy. It's too strong. Walled city and its fortifications. And also the valor of the Trojan soldiers. And also women of Troy, heroic. They were united and they were you really have to read the Iliad to get the spirit. But I'm just concentrating on the one episode, how Troy, the city of Troy, the fortress of Troy, was ultimately taken by the cunning of the Greeks. And that's the story of the wooden horse, the Trojan horse. They built this huge structure. It was huge because they wanted to have lots of soldiers to be crammed into the belly of the wooden horse. And they wanted the Trojans to take it inside. So they spread the rumor that they are withdrawing, they are giving up the siege. They went back to their ships, sailed away, and they left this in kind of atonement to the gods for the folly of ever attacking the city of Rome. And this atonement will be complete when the Trojans share this feeling with them, the joy that the war is over, take the wooden horse inside their inner sanctum, the citadel, the heart of the city. And then the gods will look down upon people, both the Greeks and the Trojans. A new peaceful era will start. And there was a lot of resistance on the part of the Trojans, who I quoted the Latin from Virgil's Aeneid. Timeo danaus et dona parentes. I fear the Greeks, especially when they bring gifts. So this Trojan horse was a gift, and that was more than suspicious. This was actually the chief priest of Troy, named by Laocoon. He had sons, and he was trying to persuade his fellow countrymen not to fall for this trick. He didn't know what it was that inside the horse there are soldiers who will, it's their plan to fall upon the people of Troy and murder them in their sleep. But he felt that there was something wrong and he wanted. And then what happened was that from the sea a serpent, a horrible creature came, like an octopus, came to shore and attacked Laocoon and his sons, killed them. And the Trojans were foolish enough to take this as a signal from the gods that Laocoon was wrong and they should indeed take the wooden horse into their inner sanctum, citadel. And they did. And still there was a chance for them to escape their fate, because they had problem in pushing that thing through the gates. The gates were big, but this horse was almost as big. And as they pushed the horse, it banged against the frame of the gate, and they could actually hear that there was something inside. There were sounds coming. Some soldiers were actually hurt, and they said, ouch, and that could be heard outside. In particular, the daughter of King Priam of Troy, his wife's name was Hecuba, and the daughter's name was Cassandra. And Cassandra had the power of tell the future. It's a gift from the god Apollo. And she, just like Glaucon, tried to persuade the rest of the Trojans not to do this foolish act of taking, of falling for the trick of the Greeks. And she pointed out to them that, look, there are noises coming out of this, so at least investigate before you do. But you see, the sense of victory was too great for the Trojans. They did not listen to her and went ahead. And the rest of the story you do. Now, why did I recall this legend, or there might have been some historical evidence that they did find ruins of Troy, present-day Turkey. But it's an epic tale. You might even say it's a myth. Well, I had a purpose in spending all this time relating this, coming back to it. And my purpose is to point out to you the very interesting parallel between the fate of Troy and what is happening to us, what has happened to us. Because here it is. In this epic struggle between the two documents, the Constitution of the United States on the one hand and the Communist Manifesto on the other, it looked that the Soviet Union, which represented, of course, the Communist Manifesto, lost. The Soviet Union lost the Cold War. It collapsed. It got dismembered, it disintegrated, fell into its constituent pieces. And a lot of the politicians jumped at this and say, hey, that's the victory, just like the Trojans. The Soviet Union is gone. The Communist Manifesto is gone. In this epic struggle between the two documents, Constitution and the Communist Manifesto, the right document came out on top, the U.S. Constitution. The year was 1991. There was still a chance at that time to save the world if the politicians in the United States would have made the right decision and say, well, we have to compromise on the Constitution because this was the greatest challenge to the U.S. Constitution, the challenge of the Communist Manifesto. The Soviet Union became a nuclear power, threat, and in fact they didn't even conceal it. Khrushchev came to the United States on a visit, and he stepped out of the airplane and said, we are going to bury you. So that didn't happen, of course, but something else happened. The collapse of the Soviet Union unfortunately didn't mean the victory of the U.S. Constitution over the Communist Manifesto, in spite of the big celebration, the announcement that now we have, because the U.S. Constitution was violated before, well, you could have used the argument that it was necessary because of the circumstances, because of the challenges. But once the Soviet Union collapsed, it disintegrated, it was out of the way, it became incumbent on the American politicians to say, this was their chance to say that the U.S. Constitution unfortunately has been compromised, especially when it came to its monetary provisions, monetary clauses, and we are going to rectify this right away, because this is very important for the future of this country and the future of the world. So nothing like that happened. If anything, the process of decay was allowed to continue and doing more damage. And in fact, I would say that the Trojan horse, the Communist Manifesto, was brought into the inner sanctum of the world, first of all the United States, but by implication also the world, because the fact that the Constitution has been compromised was never recognized. So all this victory celebration was just as foolish as the victory celebration of the Trojans was. The Greeks withdrew and pretended that they have sailed away, given up. And the Trojan horse, which is the Communist Manifesto, is being dragged into the inner sanctum of our legal system, of our culture, of our science. It corrupted economics. We've talked about this quite a lot during this symposium. And only one thing is left, which is, shall we be murdered in our sleep? When the belly of the Trojan horse is going to be opened and the Greek soldiers will fall upon innocent people and start murdering. Well, we don't know. We don't know. All we can do is play the role of Cassandra, play the role of Malcolm, and try to warn people of the danger. Of course, Cassandra was cursed. And that's also an interesting story which I just mentioned, by the way. En passant, I mentioned it. Cassandra, the daughter of the king, was a beautiful girl. And she was in the temple of Apollo, who was the god with the power of predicting the future. Various temples in Apollo were the sacred places where people went and asked the priests and priestesses about the future. And usually they got an answer, but it was in codes, we would say today. It was not immediately obvious what the answer meant, so you had to interpret it, and if you didn't interpret it the right way, then you would never get the proper meaning, the truthful answer. So the god Apollo had a temple in Troy as well, and she was in the temple and fell asleep. And then the god Apollo himself appeared and looked at the girl, and she was so beautiful that the god immediately fell into love with her. So when she woke up, Apollo told her about his love, and if the girl was going to return his love, he would give her the power of seeing the future, being able to make prophecies. And in fact, this happened. She promised to return the love of God Apollo, and God Apollo advanced to her the power of seeing the future. However, the girl, Cassandra, changed her mind. She didn't want to reciprocate the love of God. And of course the god Apollo was furious, and he wanted to punish her severely. However, once she had the power of seeing the future, this was something that couldn't be taken back as much as the god Apollo wanted. So that was out of the question. However, the god could do something else. What did the god Apollo do to punish Cassandra? Well, he ordained that nobody would believe her. So she would make the prophecy, but they would laugh at her, ridicule her, and in fact, she would be imprisoned by her father because she was spreading this all along the Trojan War, that what's going to happen, how people will be murdered in their sleep, and Troy will be burnt up and raped and looted, and men will be killed, and women and children will be sold into slavery. She predicted it all. Although nobody believed her, but the father, King Priam, was afraid that perhaps, given time, people will start believing her, and that, of course, would reduce the fighting spirit of the Trojan people. So he couldn't afford to take that risk. So he locked her up in the tower, kept her incommunicado, but he made sure that the guards would report back to him what kind of new prophecies she would come up with. But that was the sad story. So she was let out of her prison only after the victory, or the victory which the Trojans believed that was theirs, which it wasn't. But that's just a little sideline. Going back to the US Constitution, the celebration of victory over the Soviet Union, the communist system, and the Communist Manifesto is completely misplaced because the Americans missed the opportunity to make amends for the violation of their constitution. And this is the danger. But now we are repeating, and history repeats itself, and we are repeating the same mistake, taking the Trojan horse into our fortress. Now, so what can we do? Well, we can spread the word, of course, like Cassandra did. Whether we'll succeed or not is quite another question. But we have a strong point here because irredeemable currency is the instrument of totalitarian regimes. Lenin and Hitler used it, and they could not have prevailed if they didn't. Both Lenin's system and Hitler's system used the same tools, irredeemable currency. No sooner than they grabbed power, they eliminated gold from the monetary system and they replaced it with irredeemable currency. And that's not the only thing which they shared. In fact, they were ideological twins, Lenin and Hitler. They shared the idea of socialism, except that Lenin talked about international socialism and Hitler was talking about national socialism. But socialism it was in both cases, and socialism couldn't exist, coexist with gold standard, sound money. That's a contradiction. And finally, the two men, Lenin and Hitler, shared another thing. They considered mass murder as an instrument of policy, an admissible instrument of policy. But mass murder meant also murdering innocent people, in some cases children. So, there you have it. And that's our strength, that we have the historical record, and we can tell the world that this is what has been going on, and this is the danger that could happen. So, I will wind this up, and after the photo opportunity, and the tea will come back. I would like to have a good discussion on this. Our main enemy is the corruption of science, which took place under the regime of irredeemable currency. Corrupted public education, our universities, and to a lesser or greater degree, our science, especially the science of economics. But we cannot rely on the media, completely sold out to the policy makers, put irredeemable currency at the center. Financial journalism can't count on that. They are sold out. Just one example how they succeeded in putting things upside down. The very name bond, and as I explained to you in one of my lectures, the bond market is by far the greatest market in the world. It's bigger than the stock market, bigger than the real estate market, bigger than all these markets put together. The word bond means, has meant, for hundreds of years, that the debtor is in bond to the creditor. Bond, tied up. Until the debtor repays the debt in full, is in bond. course, you might have a sympathy to the debtor, but that sympathy is completely misplaced, because the debtor, in most of the cases, was always the powerful, and the creditor was the downtrodden, because the creditor was everybody. Creditor was everybody who had to have paper money in order to buy food for children, for himself, pay for education and all the rest. So any kind of sympathy for the debtor is completely misplaced. We should have sympathy for the creditor, which is everybody, us. That's the creditor. So this is what happened when they say today bond. The meaning is no longer that the debtor is in bond to the creditor, but the other way around. The bond is on the creditor. The bond is on, we are in bond. We are people who are forced to carry paper bills in our pocket, and we have to exchange our goods and our labor for irredeemable paper money, which is the proof that we have been put into slavery. So that's the subtle thing. Changing the original meaning of words is just one example. To my mind, it's one of the most important examples. The subtle change in the meaning of words takes place, and people don't complain. They accept it, even when they are being victimized. Now, let me wind up this lecture by changing the word slightly in the Communist Manifesto. I say this: victims of paper money unite. Victims of irredeemable bonds rise. All you can lose is your chains. Thank you very much. So, Louis, where are we going now? For the
Our question and answer period of the very last session of the week. Just pointing out that there are still some copies of this if you haven't picked one up yet, which is something Julian and his group put together about the various schools of thought. That's what they are. They're not science. Not one, please.
except us.
Just so, Professor, please, I'm happy to chair for you. We've all heard the professor's call for us to unite.
Drive.
Individuals for the world unite.
It doesn't like this machine. It likes to drive. Just wait. It was in my pocket, so I might have completely disrupted its operations. Is it okay? Thank you. Thanks very much.
Excuse me, Louis, earlier in the week you mentioned a book on real bills.
Oh,
What was the title of that book, please?
I'm very sorry about that. Time has just. I have your contacts. I will arrange for that book to be copied, and probably I'll PDF the copy and make it available for whatever cost, if there is one that I need to get redeemed
That's
for.
very kind.
But this book is, I can't vouch for it as the, authoritative source for real bills, but it's a book that was published in the 50s from an organization in London that was an acceptance house or a discount house during the real bills time, tried to resurrect it, but of course with fiat money. But the whole, it's useful, I haven't read it in full, but it's very useful to help with the mind's challenge of visualizing how it all works in the terminology.
The format of the real bills, and whatever information has to go on, the technical nitty-gritty of endorsing the bill and so on. It's useful for that.
And there are some examples in the pocket of the book in the back, so that will get PDF as well, and I'll be in touch. With that in mind, you may be interested to read it. Right. Who wants to go first?
Let me just ask you a question. The other day you mentioned about bonds or bills, and there was an adjunct. You spoke of an adjunct, which was redeemable in gold. Did I get that wrong?
No, you didn't get that wrong. That's a very good question if you didn't understand it. Do you understand the question? It was really about the bond market in the system continues to operate because people can actually hedge in their gold futures.
Oh, yeah, that's very important.
Yeah.
It's very important. Because that is your basic understanding of the setup, and also the French with the
Numéraire.
numéraire. Yeah, sorry. Have to practice that. How this will come unwound.
Oh, dénouement.
Denouement.
Dénouement. Okay.
No, that is better. Denouement. You want to understand what to expect, what the unwinding, or what the system will be. So the U.S. Treasury bond market operates business as usual. Very little, or in fact no sign showing, to my mind. A lot of people say, oh, interest rates will shoot up and that will pull it down and foreign investors will stay away and all that. I don't see it that way. I think it's still pretty sturdy, the U.S. Treasury bond market, and I have explained the reasons why. One thing is that they have tried the bond speculators to pick up, regardless how much new Treasury bonds are issued, the bond speculators stand ready to grab them, because they know they can always turn around and dump it into the lap of the Fed. But there is another reason which is more subtle, which is that the gold futures markets in the United States, there are several of them, the main one in New York, but there's also one in Chicago, and there are smaller ones in the Midwest or somewhere. I don't know if there's any in California, but it doesn't matter. There are gold future markets, and they operate as an adjunct to the bond market. Because nobody can really say that the U.S. Treasury bonds are irredeemable. Because if you want to redeem them in gold, all you have to do is at maturity, or you sell the bond and then take the proceeds to the futures market and take delivery of the future. You are going long on the future, gold future, and take delivery. Now sure, this doesn't mean that the bond is redeemable at a fixed price, which it should have been in the first place. But as long as there are functional gold future markets in the United States, you can get gold for paper. So in an indirect way, your Treasury bond is redeemable in gold. But that is true only as long as the gold future markets do redeem, the word is not redeem, but you can take delivery of your gold future contract in the form of gold. And we know there are two problems with that. One is that occasionally the COMEX clearinghouse declares liquidation only, and what's the other thing that
Cash settlement. Cash settlement only.
cash settlement, that's right. So in other words, if you have a gold future and you are in a winning position, you will be paid in US dollars your profit. This can be taken for granted. But the point is that the exchange unilaterally changed the rules and no delivery. But you see, it's in the contract, futures contract, that you have the right to take delivery of the physical. But the small print says that there are exceptional cases when the exchange can refuse delivery. You see? So that's one big problem with the gold futures market. And the other big problem is, of course, the permanent backwardation, which is a threat. It's like Damocles' sword hanging over. And if you look at the history of the gold basis going back to 1970s, it couldn't be any more clear than that we have this falling basis, which is now pretty near zero. And people, observers, dismiss this, that this doesn't mean that the basis is vanishing. It simply means that interest rates are low. But I think that's just trying to put a brave face on a very bad situation. The basis is diminishing and it's very close to zero, and it's in the danger of falling through the zero line and falling so badly that it will not be able to bounce back. Now, Sandeep explained earlier this morning that he can see this as a possibility that this will repeat several times. The basis goes negative but bounces back. And in fact, we are confident that his tool, the cold basis, can give us an early warning signal when the luck is running out and the permanent backwardation, or what I call tongue-in-cheek, last contango in Washington will occur. So that's it. Now, why is it? To my mind, basically, is because that's the end of the U.S. bond market, the market in U.S. Treasury bonds, which is a huge market. Because I know that the biggest holders of U.S. Treasury bonds are not fools. They are not fools. They know that if a bond is maturing in an irredeemable promise, nothing more, then this bond is irredeemable itself. This is very clear to me. But as long as these big bondholders, foreign governments, foreign central banks, and wealthy individuals have an access to the gold futures market, and the gold futures market is not in immediate danger of going to permanent backwardation, then they consider this as their guarantee that the bond is, at least for the time being, not irredeemable. But once the point of no return is reached, that faith disappears. And I think that will automatically mean the end of the bond market. And once, you see, today they still talk about the bonds being the safest possible investment there is in the world. Buy US bonds or Treasury bills or similar things. They still seriously believe that. And all the security advisors tell their clients that, look, if you're
Not all,
well,
Professor.
not all, well, you see, you are not subject to U.S. jurisdiction, so you can say that, but I'm not sure. But anyhow, you are right, not all. So, if this point of no return is reached, game is up. Game is up. The U.S. Treasury bonds, bills, notes became irredeemable. They will not, maturity, they will not deliver anything but just another irredeemable promise. Finished.
Professor, can I add?
Yeah.
My way of looking at that adjunct is to look at it as hedging. It's a form of hedging. Instead of having your bond asset denominated in the dollar, you've hedged it into gold. Just like you would hedge a foreign bond back to your local currency if you don't want to be exposed to a foreign currency by using futures of currencies, selling that currency forward and buying your domestic currency forward. You do a similar transaction by buying futures
It's
and
a very
buying a
good point.
future gold contract.
So that's a derivative.
It's a derivative. It's a form of changing because you have to. It's changing what your investment, your bond investment, is denominated in, effectively.
You see, there is a difference between derivatives on paper and derivatives on gold. Because derivatives on gold, such as gold futures and gold options, they give you this escape route, which the other one doesn't have. So, as Louis says, hedging is possible. Hedging in physicals is possible. Just how long this is true and so on is another question, but momentarily this is possible, and a lot of wealthy investors and foreign governments, foreign central banks, do take it seriously. This gives them an added measure of security, and but that will change. If permanent backwardation comes, I think it will be a matter of days, if not hours, that the realization is going into the public thinking.
You wanted to ask a follow-up question?
Professor, what is your personal perspective or opinion on the allegations of Gatta concerning manipulation of the futures markets in gold and silver?
I think it's a waste of time. I mean, to go to court and sue the Bank for International Settlements or the Fed or Treasury, it's just so futile. I would waste half an hour on that effort. And they, spend money on it and so on. I know they are manipulated, and that's no secret, and they consider it as their sacred duty to do that, which they derive from the fact that they have to protect the value of the currency of the country, and they dress it up as protection of the public. You know? So, I mean, what's the point proving that there is such a manipulation? I know there is, but to challenge that. And another thing which I would criticize in the action of Gatta is their slogan that the gold market is not free. But you know, even if you assume that there's no government interest, it will not make the gold market free. I tell you why. Because the gold futures market, or the gold market, is far more a reflection of the fluctuating value of the paper money, in this case the dollar, than gold. So in other words, the idea of a free market in gold, to my mind, is dependent on the mint being open to gold. You know, because if the mint is not open to gold, then these gold markets are really not only distorted and corrupt and all that, but they are not a free market. They're not, because gold is the only thing we have which approximates stability in the economic world. Everything else, prices, interest rates, and so on, subject to fluctuation, and sometimes very violent. So in that universe where you have economic values, they are fluctuating, in some cases gyrating. The only point of reference is gold, which is relatively stable. In fact, it's far more stable than anything else you can think of. So a gold market where the price fluctuates simply because the currency in which you pay for your gold is fluctuating is not a free market, because it's tied in with the paper money which underlies that market. It's not free.
On manipulation, if I may, Professor, I encourage you to visit the privateer in Australia. On his website, the Gold This Week page with commentary, he uses a word that's more appropriate. I think he refers to the price of gold being governed.
That's Bill
Buckler. Bill Buckler, yes. And
you know him in person?
Oh, I've spoken to him, but no, I've never met the man. He's a reclusive. He lives up north, further north than Cairns. Port Douglas.
Yeah.
Queensland, Port Douglas somewhere. But basically, you know, having put gold outside the system, it's not too difficult to understand why it's important that they interact with the price of it to maintain confidence. And so it's not so much manipulation. Yes, you can use that word, but it's what they have to do, having done what they've done earlier. So I prefer the word governed. It's poor governance, but governance nevertheless. And he calls gold a political metal. It's a monetary metal, of course, but it's become a political metal as a result.
Do you think this endeavour to govern the price of gold over the years has given it a great opportunity to buy it under its real value?
Do you think that having governed the price of gold all these years gives the price of gold more upward potential? Is the question.
I don't think in terms of gold price going high. I'm completely sold on the idea of permanent backwardation. That's what the ultimate outcome will be. It will surprise a lot of people from one day to the next. They expect a big jump in the gold price, and instead they get gold backwardation. Gold is no longer for sale for paper money, period. So if you want to get gold, you've got to go to barter. That's coming, and that's the way I see that we are going. Now, of course, I'm not denying that gold price could go a lot higher, but it could also fall a lot. So, in other words, what is clear to me is that volatility in the gold price, as long as there is a gold price, is going to increase. That's taken for granted. And that doesn't depend whether gold goes up or gold goes down. And be sure it will go down as well. Because it's the fluctuation, it's the volatility which will increase. That's why I think the work what Sandeep is doing is so important, because Sandeep and his advisory service does a great job in trying to measure volatility and how it increases. This is very important, because the measure of volatility is one of the clues you have. But, there is such a thing as runaway vibration in physics. Most of the examples which you have in physics are, what's the word? Dampened vibration, which is natural. If you set a pendulum in motion and leave it, then within a certain period of time, it will die down and stop. And the same thing with the sound or any kind of electromagnetic waves and so on. If you don't keep the input, new energy packages going, then they will die out. And it follows an exponential curve. The vibration is dying down according to an exponential law. But what is not mentioned very often is that there is a reverse situation when the vibration becomes a runaway vibration. One example is the famous Tacoma bridge disaster in the United States. I think it was in the 1940s. There was a gale force wind, and this was a suspension bridge, very pretty, as suspension bridges are usually pretty, their outline. And then the wind came with packages of energy, always. Now, normally, that wouldn't do much damage, because if the frequency, there's a resonance frequency of the bridge, it should have been calculated by the designers, but obviously they missed that point. If this frequency, the bridge, just like glass, you can get a sound out of it, which is a kind of resonance sound. Now, if the energy packages arrive near the resonance frequency of the bridge, then they are going to get amplified and very greatly amplified. An energy package in itself is not significant. What is significant is that they keep adding. And as they do, the amplitude increases and it will reach a point when it breaks the bridge. Now at that time there was a guy who was traveling in a car and he had in those days it wasn't video cameras, but it was just an ordinary movie camera. And he got out and he saw this was his opportunity and started filming this, and it has been preserved. And it's fantastic. You've got to see it to believe what happened. It took several minutes for the bridge to collapse. And, it's incredible. It's an incredible sight. One of the most impressive things which I have seen, motion picture, say a 5-minute film strip. And you can view it because actually at one point I put it on the internet. And then the fellow who was running that website went out of business and I don't know what happened.
It's on YouTube and we have a list.
Still?
Oh yeah, Galloping Dead Sleep.
Yeah.
It's on YouTube.
Yeah.
Last time I looked at it. But it is truly incredible.
Well,
It's
I
huge
would
bridge.
advise you should all look at it. Now, why do I bring that? Because exactly the same thing will happen with the volatility of the gold futures options market. This is, the volatility will keep increasing, but there is a limit. There is a breaking point. We don't know where it is, and probably it's further away. It's not imminent. Sandy pointed out how much volatility, almost double overnight. But I think there's room for the volatility to increase maybe tenfold, I don't know. But you can be sure that there's a breaking point when the system cannot stand more volatility. It snaps. So that's what I suggest, that measuring volatility and following it and watching it, keeping an eye on it is very important. It will give you, don't anticipate that the collapse is imminent. It's not. At least I don't see it that way. So I recall volatility and option premiums in the 1980s. They increased incredibly. You weren't around. You weren't watching the market then. But I think that you have a way to check option prices in the 1980s.
Yes.
That will give you an idea how much volatility will still be possible. I think it's going to be similar this time. And option prices were just incredibly high. You could not buy a whole option. So this is coming, and there you can make your fortune and your advisory service, because it's a wonderful strategy. You say it's already very, very promising and profitable to buy the cash gold. Now, you have your core holding of gold, you don't touch that, but you also have a trading account, and then you have gold in it, and you can sell options, call options against it. Not all at once, but as the price increases, the premium will get higher, not only because of the time premium, but also you might be able to cover your short position in the option market next day because it went further. So in other words, there's just risk-free profits, and you still have the gold. It's a fantastic opportunity, and you've got to be prepared for that. It's coming. It's coming. It's a very good strategy. Very good strategy. It's a covered option. And of course you have the other one, the put. That's the puts. But this is even more technical also. But I mean, the two complement one another.
Earlier in the week, you talked about the Tower of Debt and how that could come crashing down and destroy our current fiat system. If some point in the future we go back to a commodity-based system, what are the implications of rebuilding a tower of debt on top of a commodity system?
Well, I thought this was pretty clear that gold as the ultimate extinguisher of that will put an upper limit. You see, if there is a tendency for a new tower of debt under the gold standard to develop, then there will be more and more call for cash goals. A lot of people who hold debt instruments will find it unsafe. And the way they can bail out. Today they can. I mean, you are stuck with it. You can buy insurance, but that's just another layer which changes nothing. But under the gold standard, you bail out by selling your paper and getting gold. And because gold is an ultimate, is the only ultimate extinguisher of debt, this puts an effective upper limit on the tower. And history bears it out. I mean, there was no debt tower under the gold standard.
Oh, maybe I ask you a question, Professor. It's about your least favorite subject, the price of gold.
Oh. So what do you want me to do?
I fully get what you say, that once we go into permanent backwardation, you won't be able to get gold at any price in fiat currency. You will be able to get gold if you have other goods in demand. And would you not say that the value of gold then will be higher than the value of gold now?
But how do you measure the value?
Well, in terms of how much goods you get for an ounce.
Oh, there is no way to establish with any degree of certainty how much.
But would you not say that it will likely be more, it will likely command more oil, or it will likely command more cotton or more wheat, ounce per ounce, than perhaps it does today?
Probably you are right, but this is going to be very difficult to both to measure or to take advantage of this. I would say yes, because certainly silver is way underpriced, way under. Silver is so cheap that I cannot believe it.
I have to wonder why they call it the precious metal.
Now, I think gold is still cheap, but not as cheap as silver. But you see, these are treacherous waters. So I wouldn't be safe navigating, and therefore, I would go as far as saying that, sure, if there was no other choice, then you watch the gold price or gold's value in other commodities. But the fact is that there are far superior ways of handling this if you have the spirit of taking the chance. Because all these things which Sandy is following, gold basis, gold co-basis, the volatility of options, and the how to take advantage of the gold-silver arbitrage. So in other words, you watch the gold basis and gold basis and silver basis, gold basis, and they vary independently. So there's four variables, but there is a message with every wiggle of that. These are fantastic tools. So it just looks too pedestrian and uninteresting. You say gold price is not my favorite. Well, it's not. You are right. But because there are these absolutely superb possibilities to play,
To play it, but to ultimately acquire it.
Oh, wow, sure. No, I always mean that you have a core holding and you keep adding to it because you make profits in your trading and every month or you put your profits into the core account. And
What you're saying, basically, Professor, is that what matters is how many ounces you have, not so much what happens to the price of gold.
yes. Yeah. And as this idea of you separate the core account from your trading account, and you have to periodically put your profits into the core account, never the other way. And if you see that for some time you haven't been able to shift your profits, it means that you have the wrong strategy. You've got to find a better strategy. Because I think from now on, it should be profitable. Because as Sandy explained it to us this morning, the volatility has reached a point where it's clear sailing. And it doesn't matter whether gold shoots up or it falls back, because both will whip up volatility. Yeah. Fantastic. I wish I was younger, but I cannot put my pension into this game because I depend on, I'm an old man, so and my children have been through university, and so I think I have very little gold myself, a bit of silver. I think, it will cover me. I probably will be able to face future with serenity, or we don't know the future. But, just the challenge of it's an intellectual challenge. I wish I was younger, because I would be in that game up to here.
Well, I would suggest that if things got as bad as they could, that an ounce of gold would buy less, because the overall economy is grinding to a halt. And just as you maybe experienced trying to get out of Hungary or whatever, with having to give a gold watch to make the border crossing, before the collapse, you could have gotten across that border for less than a gold watch. So I think there's a possibility that your gold would buy less in an apocalyptic event.
Do you understand? He's suggesting that if things get really, really bad, and referring to previous times, such as you've experienced or others, Vietnam, Hungary, where an ounce of gold could buy your trip across the river or whatever to freedom, that would normally perhaps cost a lot less than an ounce of gold. So
history indicates that if there's a
So
collapse,
in that sense, an ounce of gold buys less in those times. So he's suggesting that if we are going to have really catastrophe, everything collapses, maybe an ounce of gold will buy less than it does now.
I don't know how you can justify this. There are scenarios, but there are also scenarios which contradict it, so there's no way to predict. I would say you just have to be prepared. And if it buys more, fine. If it buys less, fine. You still have your insurance. And I would worry about that.
No question, you're better off if you've got it. than if you don't have it. Yeah.
How many ounces you have is what
Correct.
matters.
Correct.
But you see, crossing the border is just one of the several problems. I mean, there would be an acute shortage, for example, of medicine. You might have to buy your medicine from gold. I recall that in 1945, my mother took my sister to the dentist, and her teeth, my sister's teeth, needed to be taken care of. And the dentist looked at her and said, okay, that will be that much, that many grams of gold. And then my mother was taken aback. The dentist went down and said, well, you have a pretty gold chain, it will be that many centimeters. It's just the eye of a flicker. That's a true story. And I still have my grandfather, in those days, they were my grandfather's days, which is late 19th century, early 20th century. They had pocket watches, gold pocket watch, heavy gold, and a heavy chain, which was attached to what's a vested, as they call it. Anyhow, the gold watch was long gone because after World War I there was tremendous inflation in Hungary, and they had to buy food. And so, but the chain was in my mother's possession. My grandfather died, and my mother inherited it. And this is how we survived after World War II. My mother was literally clipping, just that much. She had to buy food or medicine, dental services. So, of the heavy chain, there's that much left. I still have it, and I treasure it because it reminds me, something I will never forget. And that's the story.
We have time for one more question, two. No? We're all overwhelmed. Well, thank you very much, Professor.
And I thank you, because without you, we wouldn't have this. And I think, you may say you've learned something, and I hope you do, but believe me, I've learned a great deal, because, from the questions, discussions, comments, and so on. And the fact was very encouraging that we have had several sessions of the previous, through trial and error, we have symposia and courses and so on. But this, so far, is the best attended and the most exciting, I can truthfully say that. So I thank everybody, and in particular I'm thanking Louis, and Julian is not here, but I thank him too, because he's one wonderful facilities, and we hope to be able to come back and to continue, evaluate what happened here. That this won't be the most crucial year, the next one, in my judgment. But we will certainly know a lot more a year from now than we do know now. That much is clear to me. But the real crisis, I think, comes comes a little late. I may be wrong. A lot of people, what I read on the internet and websites and this and that, there are these tip sheets, investment advisory on gold, silver,
Paper gold.
and paper gold. They all predict a very early crisis, and mainly in the form of an eruption of the hyperinflation, which then will be uncontrolled and probably speedy entry. They see the deflation after. I'm rather inclined to believe that deflation will have to run its course and will get much worse before it snaps and hyperinflation. So I don't see, it will be like an agony, a painful death watch. That's what I see. I may be wrong. So I always say to those who listen to me that I'm confident I'm right, but I cannot guarantee, because all kinds of things can happen. You know.
We won't hold you to account.
Yeah, okay. Now, just for one example, I used to say that, look, if this guy Bernanke at the helm goes crazy and starts printing money, then all the bets are off. I was always of the opinion that deflation, or I said, if that Bernanke goes mad and he starts printing money as he said he would, and drop US dollar bills from the helicopter, some people call him helicopter.
Helicopter then.
I said, then I take all my bets on the deflation. Now, believe it or not, he has done it, and it's still deflation. In other words, he is helpless. He's helpless. Deflationary forces are so powerful at this point that even this guy, who acts like a man, is not able to think about it.
Do you think you might commit suicide at one point?
But he might have a little bit of gold stashed away.
This is what I would like to know. What is the personal portfolio of Alan Greenspan? Paul Krugman, yes. Stiglitz, yes. Well, thank you very much, Professor. Thank you, everyone. Safe travel for everyone who is traveling back home.
Thank you, Louis.